They walked past her every day, phones in hand, coffee in the other, chasing meetings, chasing deadlines. And her, she just mopped the floors, emptied the trash, cleaned what others left behind, invisible, forgotten, as if she was part of the building itself. But then, on that ordinary morning, something happened. The CEO was walking his usual path to the executive floor, lost in numbers, in deals, in expansion plans, when a voice cut through the air, smooth, calm, commanding. But it wasn't English. It was Mandarin, fluent, precise. Native-level Mandarin, the kind of fluency that takes years, even decades, to master. He froze, turned, and there she was, the janitor, the woman nobody ever noticed, speaking to a lost foreign visitor, as if it was second nature. And then she switched, Spanish, then French, and then more. 9 languages, fluent, effortless, perfect. In that moment, the CEO realized something most companies never do. Hidden right beneath his feet was a talent far greater than many sitting inside his boardrooms. But what he did next, no one, absolutely no one, inside that company was prepared to witness. Because his decision would not only change her life forever, but shake the entire company to its core and expose a truth most corporations are too afraid to admit. Pause for tension. If this story already has you hooked, then don't wait. Hit the like button right now. Comment, "The Invisible is about," to be seen below, and subscribe to the channel, because what happens next you simply won't believe. The morning had started like any other. Jonathan Kellerman, CEO of Hallberg International, walked through the marble lobby without even glancing up. His mind was already 5 meetings ahead, juggling profit forecasts, global expansion targets, and investor expectations. He barely noticed the rain outside, barely heard the constant shuffle of employees rushing past him, and he certainly didn't notice the janitor mopping the far end of the lobby, at least not until now. That's when the voice stopped him. Soft at first, but unmistakably fluent, Mandarin, and not just textbook Mandarin, native, fluid, confident. Kellerman blinked, his steps faltering for the first time all morning. He turned toward the sound. The janitor stood beside the touchscreen lobby directory. She wasn't wearing a headset. She wasn't reading from a phone. She was speaking directly to an older Chinese businessman, guiding him to the elevators with perfect pronunciation, warm gestures, and calm authority. Jonathan frowned slightly. His mind was trained to calculate, to notice patterns others missed, and this pattern didn't fit. He'd passed this woman before, dozens of times, burgundy uniform, cleaning cart, quiet, invisible, but now she was something entirely different. Before he could fully process it, another voice approached, a delivery man struggling with boxes. "Señora, ¿dónde dejo esto?" the man asked in Spanish. Without missing a beat, she shifted. "En la sala de conferencias B, por favor. A la izquierda, segunda puerta." The delivery man smiled, nodded, and moved along. And then another man stepped forward, a vendor from Marseille, confused about mislabeled inventory. She didn't hesitate. "Non, monsieur, les étiquettes sont incorrectes. Cette palette doit aller à l'entrepôt du sous-sol." French, perfect French. Jonathan's heartbeat quickened. Mandarin, Spanish, French, seamless, instantaneous. It wasn't just impressive, it was astonishing. For a moment, he simply watched, studying her. No notes, no cheat sheets, just years of mastery buried beneath a janitor's uniform. Finally, he stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned to him, calm, composed. Her eyes met his. "Yes, sir?" She answered politely. "That was Mandarin you spoke, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir." "You speak it fluently?" "I do." "And the Spanish, the French?" She nodded gently. "Yes, and Portuguese, German, Arabic, Italian, Swahili, and I can read Latin, though that hardly comes up anymore." Jonathan simply stared. 9 languages. 9. She wasn't just a janitor. She was a walking international department, a talent most companies spent millions trying to find, already here, wiping floors. And suddenly, Jonathan Kellerman realized he had been blind for far too long. The moment hung heavy in the air. A man like Jonathan Kellerman, a man who built an empire on precision and control. This was uncharted territory. In boardrooms, he always knew who held the leverage. But here, standing in front of a woman whose name he didn't even know, he realized he was no longer in control of this conversation. "What's your name?" he asked softly, almost cautiously. "Denise," she answered, her voice even. "Denise Atwater." He repeated the name in his mind. Denise Atwater, a name he had likely passed by 100 times, printed on a badge, stitched onto a uniform. And yet, it had meant nothing to him until this moment. "Miss Atwater." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Are you free for a few minutes?" Her brow furrowed slightly. Not out of fear, but because this wasn't how the world usually worked. "Now?" she asked. "Yes, if you're willing." For a brief second, he saw the flicker of hesitation, the hesitation of someone who had spent years being overlooked, someone who had learned not to expect opportunity from people like him. But then she nodded. "All right." He pressed the elevator button, holding the door for her as she stepped inside. The silence inside the lift was different now, not awkward, but electric. As they ascended, she spoke first. "I've worked here 13 years, she said quietly. "This is the first time I've ever been invited up." Jonathan smiled faintly, but his mind was already racing. "You might be surprised," he said softly, "how quickly things can change." Neither of them knew how prophetic that statement would soon become. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open onto the executive floor, a world far removed from the janitor's closet and service halls she was used to. Polished walnut floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek leather chairs, walls that smelled of old money and unspoken power. His assistant looked up, wide-eyed, clearly confused by the sight of Denise beside him. But Kellerman simply nodded, wordlessly signaling her to let them pass. Inside his glass-walled office, he gestured to a chair. "Please, have a seat." She lowered herself gently into the chair, folding her hands in her lap, eyes scanning the room. Not in awe, but with the same quiet observation that had allowed her to master 9 languages. Jonathan sat across from her, studying, calculating, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure where this conversation would lead. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let her story end behind a mop. Jonathan leaned forward, elbows resting gently on his desk. He studied her, not her uniform, not the badge, but her eyes. There was no desperation in them, no rehearsed pitch, only calm, measured, steady. "Denise," he began carefully, "I'll be honest, I didn't expect to have this conversation today, but what I just saw, the way you spoke Mandarin, Spanish, and French like they were second nature, I need to understand something." She didn't move. She didn't blink. She only waited. How does someone like you, someone with that kind of talent, end up cleaning floors at Halberg International? The question wasn't meant to shame. It was genuine. But the weight of it filled the room like fog. She exhaled, slowly, rubbing her palms together as if warming up for what was to come. "You got time for the truth?" she asked softly. "I wouldn't have asked otherwise." She nodded. "I was born in Toledo, Ohio, only child. My father was a pipe fitter, my mother a nurse's aide. We didn't have much, but they worked hard. Education was everything in a house. It was like church." Jonathan listened intently. "I got a full ride to Kent State, majored in linguistics. My dream was to work as a cultural attaché, maybe even with the UN. She paused, eyes lowering briefly. "But life had other plans." Her voice didn't waver. There was no drama in her words, just fact. "My mother got sick halfway through my master's. Cancer, aggressive. I left school to care for her. 6 months later, my father passed unexpectedly from a stroke. She swallowed hard, but kept. And going. Bills piled up, no family left, and then I had my daughter. Alone, no partner who stuck around. Denise smiled faintly, but it didn't reach her eyes. So I worked. Grocery stores, nursing homes, temp agencies. Eventually, a custodial. Supervisor here offered me night hours. It paid just enough to keep the lights on and let me pick my daughter up from school. Jonathan's throat tightened. She wasn't telling a sob story. She was telling a survival story. And the languages? He asked gently. I never stopped. Learning? She smiled softly now, with a flicker of quiet pride. Every night after work, I borrowed textbooks from the library, listened to podcasts, read foreign newspapers I couldn't afford to subscribe to, anything to keep my mind sharp. She looked him in the eye. It's the one thing that always made me feel like I still mattered. The room was utterly still. Jonathan sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Here was brilliance that had gone unseen for years, not because it wasn't there, but because no one had bothered to look. Most people never asked, she added quietly. They saw the uniform and assumed. That final word cut through him like a blade. Assumed. And at that moment, Jonathan Kellerman knew he wasn't going to be like the others. The meeting could have ended there. It should have. But something inside Jonathan Kellerman refused to let this slip away as just a good conversation. He leaned forward again, eyes locked on hers. Denise, he said softly, have you ever worked in professional translation? Corporate environments? Anything tied to international business? She shook her head once. Not officially. I've volunteered at hospitals to help patients and their families, sometimes at government offices when people needed help with paperwork. But no certifications, no formal credentials. Her honesty was disarming. No certifications, Jonathan repeated under his breath, but 9 languages. 9. He paused, then stood up abruptly. Do you trust me, Denise? Her eyes narrowed slightly, more out of habit than suspicion. She had trusted too many wrong people in her life, but there was something about his tone, firm yet sincere. I guess that depends on what you're about to ask. He allowed a faint smile. I need a favor. Before she could respond, he gestured toward the door. Come with me. They left the office, walking down the executive hallway that smelled of leather, citrus, and polished wealth. Employees glanced up from their desks, curiosity flashing in their eyes as they saw the CEO walking with the woman who normally mopped their floors after hours. Denise kept her head high, but her chest tightened. She had worked in this building for 13 years, always invisible, always after hours, and now every eye was on her. They stepped into a conference room labeled 4C. Inside, 4 men and women in tailored suits sat around a long table. They were speaking softly among themselves in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, the group from São Paulo headquarters. Denise recognized their accent instantly. Jonathan leaned close to her ear. Our translator cancelled last minute. They flew in early. I need someone who can bridge the gap, and fast. Denise blinked, then inhaled deeply. Portuguese wasn't just another line on her language list. It was one of her strongest. Without hesitation, she stepped forward. Bom. Dia, senhores. Desculpem a confusão. Se precisarem de assistência, estou à disposição. The entire room shifted. The tension melted. Shoulders relaxed. Eyes lit up. One of the Brazilian executives smiled wide. Ah, perfeito. Muito obrigado. Finalmente. Alguém que entende. Denise moved seamlessly into the conversation, not just translating, but connecting, laughing with them, clarifying business terms, answering questions Jonathan couldn't even follow. Within minutes, what could have been an awkward meeting had transformed into warm, productive dialogue. Jonathan watched from his seat, a strange mixture of awe and disbelief swirling inside him. He'd spent years recruiting international consultants, hiring expensive agencies, and here, right here in his own building, was someone far more capable, someone who had been invisible. For too long, the meeting wrapped. The Brazilian team left, smiling, nodding with gratitude. One of them even whispered to Jonathan before leaving, "She's better than anyone we've worked with in years. Where did you find her?" Jonathan's reply came instinctively. "Right. Oh, here." As they left the conference room, Denise looked at him, both nervous and exhilarated, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this real?" He stopped, meeting her gaze. Very real. But even Jonathan Kellerman didn't yet realize how far this would go, and how many walls, both seen and unseen, they were about to tear down together. The rest of the day passed like a blur for Denise. Her hands still trembled slightly as she returned to her regular shift that evening, wiping down the lobby floor like any other night. But her mind wouldn't stop spinning. What had just happened? How had one chance encounter pulled her out of the shadows and placed her into that room? And what came next? As she worked, Jonathan Kellerman sat alone in his office, staring at the city skyline, lost in thought. For years, he'd listened to his board complain about talent gaps. They spent millions on recruitment firms, headhunters, global consultants, searching, always searching, and all along, someone like Denise Atwater had been right here. Not because she lacked talent, but because no one had ever looked. But now he had, and he wasn't about to let this moment slip away. The next morning before sunrise, Denise's supervisor, Ron, approached her with a puzzled look. "Hey, Denise, Mr. Kellerman wants to see you again." She froze. Her heart skipped. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked instinctively. Ron shook his head, just as confused. "No idea. He just said to send you up." The walk to the executive floor felt entirely different this time. Employees looked at her with curiosity. Some nodded politely, others whispered as she passed. When she stepped into Kellerman's office, he was already standing by the window, sipping coffee. "Come in," he said without turning. Denise stood silently by the door, until he finally faced her. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice calm but deliberate, "about how many people in this company never get a chance simply because no one takes a second look." Denise didn't speak. She had learned to be cautious with people who talked big. He continued, "I want to create a new position, one that didn't exist before, something this company needs even if we didn't know it." She narrowed her eyes slightly. "For what?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "Cultural liaison for international affairs." Her breath caught. The words didn't even sound real. "You'd handle translation, international relations, cultural training, all the things we've been fumbling through. You've already proven you can do it." Denise blinked, struggling to find her voice. "I don't have a degree. I never finished school." "You have something better. Experience, fluency, real-world intelligence, and heart." She shook her head slowly, as if trying to absorb it. "Why me?" she whispered. Jonathan's answer was immediate. "Because I saw you solve 3 problems in 3 languages before most people had their first cup of coffee yesterday. And because I'm tired of walking past people like you, people who do twice the work for half the credit." A long silence stretched between them. Denise crossed her arms. "You know people aren't going to like this." He nodded. "I don't care." Her lips trembled, but she held back the emotions. She'd swallowed far worse over the years. She wasn't about to cry now. Finally she whispered, "All right then. Let's see what I can do." Jonathan extended his hand. Denise took it, and in that simple handshake everything changed. Not just for her, but for everyone who would come after. By Wednesday morning, the entire building was buzzing. Whispers traveled faster than the elevators. Rumors spread like wildfire through every hallway, break room, and Slack channel. "The janitor? Seriously? I heard she speaks 9 languages. Maybe she used to work for the government." "No way. Kellerman promoted her just like that. Something's going on." No one knew the full story, but everyone had an opinion. Denise could feel it the moment she stepped into her new office on the 12th floor. Her nameplate was already mounted outside. Denise Atwater, Cultural Liaison, International Affairs. The office was modest, just a desk, a plant, and a clean computer monitor that hadn't even been turned on yet. To anyone else, it might have felt small. To her, it was an entirely new world. She placed her bag down carefully, exhaled and looked around. Everything felt fragile, like the wrong move might make it all disappear. Across the hall, some managers peeked out from their offices as she passed by. A few nodded politely. Others looked at her like she didn't belong. In the staff lounge, the tension was louder. Two marketing assistants whispered over lunch. I have a master's degree in international business, been here 3 years, and she was mopping floors. Her friend shrugged. Maybe she's just better than you, the first woman scoffed. Please, this is Kellerman's way of checking a diversity box. But Denise ignored the murmurs. She had faced far worse than office gossip. That afternoon, her first test arrived. Victor, head of international operations, walked into her office, clipboard in hand, his expression tight. He didn't shake. Her hand didn't smile. So you're the new liaison, he said flatly, as if reading from a script. That's what I'm told, Denise replied calmly. I've got vendor reports from Italy, contract issues from Dubai, and an unresolved partnership in São Paulo that's been stalled for 3 months. Think you can handle it? She stood up, met his stare, and answered without hesitation, I'll need a few hours to review, but yes, I can handle it. Victor dropped the thick folder onto her desk with a slight smirk and walked out without another word. Denise didn't flinch. Instead, she sat down, opened the folder and began reading. Her eyes moved quickly, analyzing contracts written in multiple languages, spotting translation errors that had cost the company thousands for years. What others saw as overwhelming, she saw as opportunity. Later that evening, as the office grew quiet, Kellerman stopped by. How was day 1? He asked with a faint grin. Denise exhaled. I've had worse. Victor give you a hard time? He doesn't scare me. Kellerman smiled wider. I figured. Then she looked at him, her voice softer now. But why me? Why now? You could have just given me a bonus and kept walking. Kellerman leaned against the doorframe, his voice quieter. Because I saw myself in you. She raised an eyebrow. You were a janitor? No, he chuckled, but I was overlooked. I know what it feels like to work twice as hard just to get half as far. Denise nodded slowly, letting his words sink in, and as the two stood there, as the CEO and the former janitor, the gap between them suddenly didn't feel so wide. By Friday morning, the tension had shifted from whispers to open resistance. The company-wide email had gone out, sent by Kellerman himself. It was short, clear, and it carried weight. We are proud to announce Denise Atwater as our new cultural liaison for international affairs. Her extensive linguistic abilities and real-world experience bring a vital perspective to our global operations. No pity, no charity, just facts. But that didn't stop the murmurs. In conference rooms, managers exchanged tight glances. In hallways, the conversations grew sharper. She's skipping the ladder completely. She has no degree. She was mopping the floor 2 weeks ago. I've got 10 years here, and they've never offered me that position. And yet something else started happening too. The junior staff, the interns, the assistants, the ones who always stayed quiet, they watched, and many of them just smiled, because someone like them had finally been seen, but not everyone was smiling. Late Thursday, Denise received an unexpected email. The subject line was simple: meeting request. Eleanor Craig, she had heard the name before, one of the company's senior board members, old money, old power, and someone who rarely involved herself with day-to-day operations. Denise arrived at the 17th floor conference room with her stomach tight, but her steps steady. Eleanor Craig sat at the polished table, a thick folder placed neatly before. Her lips pressed thin. "Please sit," Eleanor said without looking up. Denise sat. There was no greeting, no smile. "I've reviewed your file," Eleanor began, tapping the folder with a manicured nail. "No college degree, no corporate certifications, no management training." Denise didn't blink. "That's correct. You were a janitor 3 weeks ago." "I was." Eleanor finally looked up, her gaze sharp and cold. "Explain to me," she said, "how someone with your background is now handling international affairs at one of the most competitive logistics firms in the country." Denise's voice was steady. "Because I speak the languages, because I understand the cultures, because I've already fixed 2 vendor contracts and unlocked deals that your international division stalled on for months." Her words hung in the air like a stone dropped in still water. "And," she added quietly, "because I was asked." Eleanor's expression flickered, just for a second, as if she hadn't expected such a direct answer. "You think this company should run on instinct and charm?" "No, ma'am. I think it should run on results." The silence between them thickened. Finally, Eleanor closed the folder. "You're a gamble." "I'm used to that," Denise answered softly. "My entire life has been one." Neither woman smiled. Neither woman blinked. When the meeting ended, Denise didn't go back to her office immediately. She stepped outside, crossed the street, and sat on a bench facing the towering glass building that now carried her nameplate inside. For years, she had walked past these walls, invisible. Now everyone saw her, and some wanted her gone. She pulled out her phone, called her daughter, and listened to the familiar voice on the other end. "Ma, everything okay?" Denise smiled faintly, her voice steady despite the storm brewing above her. "Yeah, baby. I just needed to hear your voice." The storm didn't break her, it sharpened her. By Monday morning, Denise arrived earlier than usual, and something strange happened. When she stepped into her office, taped to the outside of her glass door was a handwritten note. 3 simple words: "We see you." No name, no signature, just quiet acknowledgement from someone, or maybe many, who had been waiting for this moment too. Inside, her desk was already stacked with files, vendor contracts, new international inquiries, and a briefing folder from Kellerman himself. But as she sat down, there was no hesitation. The doubts had been burned away. The backlash wasn't stopping her. If anything, it had fueled something far stronger than fear: clarity. By midweek, the ripple effect of her presence could be felt everywhere. Junior staffers started knocking on her door for advice before big meetings. Nervous interns sat across from her, practicing presentations they would have never been invited to deliver before. One shy young analyst named Bao, barely out of college, finally asked the question many wanted to. "How did you learn all those languages?" Denise smiled, leaning forward slightly. "One word at a time," she said. "The same way you will." Her office became more than a workspace. It became a door, one that was now open for others who had spent years walking invisible through these same halls. But not everyone was ready for the change. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into debates. Some department heads questioned Kellerman's decision, accused him of using Denise as a symbol, a way to look progressive, an experiment that made the traditional power structure nervous. But Kellerman, he didn't blink. He doubled down. That same week he walked into the company's training center, the very room where new hires were onboarded, and ordered the old plaque removed. In its place, a new sign was quietly installed: the Atwater Room. No grand speeches, no press releases, just quiet, permanent recognition. Later that day, Denise stood alone outside the room, reading the plaque. She ran her fingertips over the engraving. Her throat tightened. But she didn't cry, because this wasn't charity. This wasn't a favor. This was earned. And more importantly, this was proof. Proof that brilliance doesn't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes brilliance walks these halls at night, unseen. Sometimes brilliance holds a mop. But when seen, it doesn't just change one person's life. It rewrites the rules for everyone who comes next.